Okay, this is a step-by-step slideshow of an illustration that I created in Corel Painter, illustration of Little Red Riding Hood. These are some of the references that I used for Little Red Riding Hood and also the wolf. Later on you'll see those. I started off working very loose, really kind of turning down the opacity quite a bit times. You can really kind of barely see the image. I'm just working with a normal, I believe, a normal pencil. And you can see I actually have my references kind of like embedded into the files. And I kind of turn down the opacity really low, so it's like you can barely see the image. And then when I feel a little more confident with my mark making, I'll go ahead and make another layer and turn down the existing layer underneath quite a bit, so you can just kind of like barely see it. This is another one of the references I was working from. So it's almost like working on tracing paper to a certain degree. Even at the sketching stage, I have like lots of layers I'm kind of working with. And on the bottom right hand corner, that's the movie that I was watching while I was working on it, in case you get a little distracted by that. And these are just some more references. Once again, I just have them on kind of like separate layers. And then gradually I start to really kind of define the drawing a little bit more, gradually making my marks darker and darker. Just another one of the references I was working from. And at this stage I'm really starting to resolve it quite a bit, and eventually I get rid of some of those layers, like the initial layers of the sketches that are very loose. I tend to draw digitally just like I draw traditionally. Lots and lots of marks drawn very lightly, and then gradually building it up darker and darker when I'm more confident about the marks. And this is just like a light sketch of the background. And then finally, when I have the sketch there, I go ahead and make a layer underneath of just like a basic kind of a brick red color. And then now I'm trying to figure out some kind of simple color studies to work off of. To begin with, really kind of thinking about earth colors and really thinking about the value structure of it to begin with. Still kind of refining some of the drawing a little bit, but for the most part the drawing's kind of set in stone. And the drawing's just on a whole separate layer, and then underneath the drawing is the background color. Probably not on the canvas layer. In this image I used illustration by N.C. Wyeth because I really like the color palette. And I basically created a color set off of that image. I have a separate tutorial to show you how to do that. And then I more or less kind of like work with those colors. I think I went through several paintings. I think all by N.C. Wyeth. I think one was an impressionist painting by someone else, just kind of figuring out what kind of color scheme I wanted to work with. I find it kind of speeds up the whole process, and you kind of more or less steal someone's color palette. I think that's the one I kind of ended up going with, that pirate scene. With the exception of maybe the Little Red Riding Hood's Little Red Riding Hood. I think there I kind of diverted from the color scheme and made it a little bit brighter. So in this stage I'm still more or less just kind of working on the color study. And now that I have the color study done, now I'm going to go ahead and actually kind of work on the final. I think this was the one of the final color studies. Looks like I'm still actually working on the color study. I'm kind of playing around with some of the textures that I kind of plan on using. And in this case, I think I actually took the color study and did a quick clone of it and did an auto painting of it. Now I think we actually have the final here. And that is my annoying cat in the background. Now what I'm doing right now is kind of playing around with different textures and different papers. I wanted to have a very kind of flat graphic, almost like a collage kind of feel to it. I think I just kind of played around with the canvas paper and the watercolor paper. I even made my own little watercolor marks on a total separate layer, because if you ever play around with the watercolor brush in Corel Painter, it tends to slow down the computer quite a bit, and sometimes it'll actually crash. So I actually did an experimental watercolor image on a whole another document, and then more or less cut and paste that and inserted that texture where I wanted it to be. And I did that for pretty much everywhere where I had that watercolor kind of feeling, because I just got sick of Corel basically, crashing on me, because the watercolor brushes tend to do that. And this is just another separate document that I'm kind of playing around with, more or less just kind of splatter techniques. And I believe I ended up putting that on the blanket, I'm not sure, or I put it on this guy. And I kind of skipped a couple of steps. When I kind of gradually working on this guy, I make tons and tons of layers. So, you know, the teeth are on a layer, the nose is on the layer, the eyeballs on a layer. I think in all I had something like over 50 layers to work from. And then gradually I would kind of flatten those and condense them. But to begin with, they're all in separate layers. And how I incorporated the watercolor look is I actually made a clone of the flat graphic, this guy right here, and then I basically kind of cloned some watercolor paper on top of it to a certain degree. It's kind of a little hard to explain. But I more or less kind of made a clone of it, and then cloned it with the watercolor paper, and then I went ahead and did a cut and paste and basically replaced that kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of cold, sterile, airbrushy, Photoshop-y kind of look, because I really wanted to have something that had a little more kind of tactile nature to it. The wolf is actually probably the thing that I'm proudest of the most in this illustration. It really kind of captured that watercolor feeling. I think I was just splattered watercolor and the salt watercolor brush. And then I went in there with a nervous pen and kind of made some little scratches on there. And then eventually I started to kind of play around with the background. I did use the, I believe it's the shift button to make some straight lines, but gradually I realized that it was a little bit too stiff, and so I kind of loosened up a little bit. And with the wooden background, I actually just kind of created my own paper for that. I just got an image of wood off of the internet and captured that in the custom paper option that you have with Corel, and then just went over that with some pastels. So that's how I got that wood look. And then this is just flat graphic images, really very little texture, I think, until the very end. This was a sketch that I did for the background. I wanted an image of Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother with her, whatever, hubby, whatever you want to call him. And this actually ended up being pretty small in the actual image, the actual illustration. And I just did it in black and white really quick, because I knew the final was going to actually be pretty small on the final. And then I actually took that into iPhoto, because I like how you can make it into a sepia color really quick. And I know you can do it in Photoshop and Painter and everything. I just found that a little bit easier. And then I took the frame around that and took that into Bevel World and Corel Painter. Kind of played around with that to make it look a little more three-dimensional. And then I believe I played around with the surface texture and brought out that same wood texture that I had for the actual background there. And then it's kind of played around with the different lighting controls that you have in the apply texture option. And it's kind of getting to the point right now where it's almost done. I took it into Photoshop and played around with some drop shadows, because the drop shadow option is kind of limited in Corel Painter. And then eventually I took it into Corel Painter and kind of finished it up, and that's pretty much it.